Look at the events you've written down. Can you see that the conclusion you reached, mistakes and failure are bad, is a valid interpretation of those events? Would you say that many children the same age as you, who had the same experiences as you, would have formed the same conclusion you did? Now we're going to play a little game I like to call possibilities. Well, imagine 4 friends of yours are visiting you and looking at a videotape of the events you just wrote down. Now, your interpretation of those events when you were a child was, mistakes and failure are bad. That is one valid interpretation of Mom and Dad's behavior. That interpretation wasn't wrong, but there are other reasonable interpretations of the same childhood events that you just didn't think of as a child. So let's ask each of your friends for another alternative interpretation. Can you see that one friend might well say, Mom and Dad thought mistakes and failure were bad, just like a lot of other people, but they could be wrong. I can think of a lot of scientific breakthroughs, like penicillin, for example, that have come about as the result of mistakes. Couldn't this interpretation explain your childhood events just as well as your interpretation? Mom and Dad thought mistakes and failure were bad, just like a lot of other people, but they could be wrong. Now here's what your second friend says after watching the video of your childhood. Mom and Dad were mad or annoyed because you didn't do what they wanted or the way they wanted or when they wanted, not because you made a mistake or failed. Isn't this interpretation just as good as the interpretation you came up with, mistakes and failure are bad? Here's a third possible interpretation of your childhood events that one of your friends suggests. Mistakes and failure were considered bad in your family, but that doesn't mean they'd be considered bad in all families. They weren't in Thomas Edison's. We know that Edison tried 1,000 different filaments in the light bulb that didn't work before he finally found one that did work. When asked about this, he said, I've not failed. I've just found 999 ways that won't work. Quite obviously, he considered the first 999 attempts valuable learning experiences, not mistakes or failure. The trial and error involved in all his inventions prove that. Couldn't this interpretation explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation, that mistakes and failure are bad? You see, your childhood interactions with your parents could have lots of meanings. Here's one your fourth friend suggests. Mom and Dad's annoyance wasn't a response to your mistakes and failure. They were just too insecure to let you learn from your mistakes. Friend 1 is the second suggestion. Perhaps your parents had unreasonable expectations for a child your age. And don't forget, not achieving something isn't necessarily a failure. Michael Jordan, who turned out to be pretty well the greatest basketball player ever, was cut from his varsity basketball team as a sophomore in high school. Is that guy a failure? Friend 2 has another possibility. Not achieving something isn't automatically a failure. It's part of the learning process. Couldn't any one of these interpretations explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation that mistakes and failure are bad? Of course they can. So do you accept that mistakes and failure are bad is not a fact? It's not the truth, but just a truth? Merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of earlier events? Let me repeat the question, and please make sure you answer out loud. Does mistakes and failure are bad now seem like it's not the truth, but just a truth? Another way of saying this is, do you get that this belief is just one interpretation of many possible interpretations of the events we discussed earlier? Feel free to pause the program so you can read over the interpretations if you'd like. With a little help from me and from your friends, it's now clear that your parents' reaction to you after you didn't do what they wanted you to do could have at least 6 different reasonable interpretations or meanings. Do you remember what you wrote down a few minutes ago as the source of your belief, mistakes and failure are bad? Look at the text box below on your screen. Right now, imagine seeing what you saw then and hearing what you heard then. Take a few moments and really imagine the events of your childhood that led you to the formation of the belief mistakes and failure are bad. Didn't it seem when you were a child as if you could actually see mistakes and failure are bad in those early events with your parents? It did, didn't it? You may have the sense you didn't see the belief, you felt it. Once you formed the belief mistakes and failure are bad, you probably did feel it. I'll say more about the feeling in a minute, but what I'd like you to focus on now is not the feeling, but on my question. Didn't it seem as if you could see mistakes and failure are bad? As if it were out there in the world? Here's why we usually think we can see our beliefs. What happened was that you looked at events that could have had many different meanings and chose one, which was mistakes and failure are bad. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw Mom and Dad's behavior, it was as if you could see that meaning in their behavior. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events. You attributed the meaning to the events. They had no meaning before you gave them one. Look at the lemon on the screen. Can you see the lemon without seeing the yellow? No. The color is inseparable from the actual object. You can't see one without seeing the other. Even imagining the lemon will cause you to imagine the color yellow. It's the same when you attribute a meaning to an event. Once you do, seeing the event is the same as seeing its meaning for you. Right now, imagine being a little child and seeing Mom and Dad's behavior and expression and hearing their words and tone of voice. As you imagine it, right now as a little child, doesn't it seem as if you can see mistakes and failure are bad? It does, doesn't it? But did you really see mistakes and failure are bad? Before you answer, here's what I mean by seeing something. You can see the computer you're using now, right? What color is it? What shape is it? Where is it? Isn't it true that anything you can see can be described by shape, color, and location? You answered yes out loud, didn't you? Well then, what did mistakes and failure are bad look like when you were a child? What color was it? What shape was it? Where was it? Did you ever really see mistakes and failure are bad? Can you even see bad? Yes, I know you saw Mom and Dad's behavior when they were annoyed with you, and you heard them criticize you. Anyone could have seen that. But you just realized that what you saw and heard could have many different meanings in addition to the one you gave the events, which was mistakes and failure are bad. You may respond, Mom and Dad said mistakes and failure are bad. I heard them say it. You may have heard them say it, but you never heard that it was true. One interpretation of their statement is they were right. Another interpretation is they are wrong. It's clear that anything you can see, like a person or an object, can be physically described. So if you can't physically describe what mistakes and failure bad looks like, is it clear now that you never really saw it? Now, if you never really saw mistakes and failure are bad, what did you see? Imagine being a little kid again and tell me what you're seeing right now. Is it clear that all you really saw was the reaction of one or both of your parents when you did something? In other words, all you really saw was a series of events? Right? I heard you say yes, didn't I? Remember what I pointed out a few minutes ago. What happened was that you looked at a series of events which can be interpreted in many different ways. You gave the events one meaning, which was mistakes and failure are bad. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw Mom and Dad's behavior, it was as if you could see that meaning in their behavior. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events, you attributed the meaning to the events. Can you get that they had no meaning before you gave them one? I'm going to make an important distinction between consequences and meaning. There clearly were consequences to your parents' behavior. You got yelled at or punished, or your parents didn't talk to you. That was an unpleasant consequence. But was there any meaning to their behavior? Let me explain what I mean by meaning. Imagine you're in a room and someone you know comes in and doesn't speak to you. What might you automatically think? For example, you might have just said, they're mad at me, or they're being rude, or they had something on their mind and didn't notice me. Notice, however, that what you just said is the meaning you gave to the event. And where did the meaning you just gave their behavior come from? That's right, your mind. Meaning is in your mind, yes? So if meaning is in your mind, is there any meaning inherent in your parents' behavior, or any other events for that matter? Of course, the answer is no. So it's not that what happened to you as a child didn't matter. It just has no meaning. Is it real now that the events had no meaning until you attributed one to them? Here's another way to understand that events have no inherent meaning. When I say that, I'm saying that you don't know anything for sure about you, about other people, or about life as a result of these experiences. What do I know for sure about mistakes and failure from knowing how your parents treated you when you were a child? Nothing. And if I don't know anything, then you don't either. Now finally, if you never saw mistakes and failure are bad out there in the world, where has it been all these years? Did I hear you say that mistakes and failure are bad has only existed in your mind? That you never did see it out there in the world? That's right. Now, if the belief is more real to you as a feeling than as a concept, if it seems as if your parents' words and behavior didn't lead you to see your belief, but rather to feel your belief, here's another way to look at it. Didn't it seem as if your parents' behavior when you were a child made you feel that mistakes and failure are bad? It did, didn't it? I'd like to suggest, however, that their behavior couldn't have made you feel mistakes and failure are bad, because as you just acknowledged, the events had no meaning. And meaningless events can't make you feel anything, can they? Let's use an analogy to make this totally clear. If you're sitting in your room reading a book or watching TV with no intention of going out, and it starts raining, what do you feel about the rain? Answer out loud, please. Probably nothing. The rain is not causing you to feel anything. Now imagine you're a farmer whose crops haven't had water for weeks and are now being saved by the rain. In this situation, how does the rain make you feel? It seems as if the rain makes you feel good. Well now, let's imagine you're about to have an outdoor wedding and everyone is getting soaked. How does the rain make you feel now? It seems as if the rain makes you feel bad. But is it really the rain that's making you feel good or bad? Or is it the meaning you're giving the rain? The rain itself has no meaning and can't produce any feelings. But give the rain one meaning and you feel good. Give it another meaning and you feel bad. So if mom and dad's behavior had no meaning, it couldn't have made you feel mistakes and failure are bad. And that leads us to a very interesting question. What did make you feel that? If you don't know the answer to this question, I'll tell you. You felt that only because that's the meaning you had already given to your parents' behavior. All you know for sure is what actually happened. Your mom and dad sounded angry or annoyed and perhaps punished you when you didn't do what they wanted you to do when they wanted you to do it. Let me help you make this real. Imagine that I had been there when you were a little child and had shown you the alternative interpretations for your parents' behavior. And after that conversation you concluded, my parents have unreasonable expectations of me. Their annoyance has nothing to do with whether mistakes and failure are bad or not. Now imagine being a little kid, and that after this conversation mom and dad get annoyed at something you did or didn't do. Notice how it feels to be a child who's thinking, my parents have unreasonable expectations of me. That's why they're annoyed, not because mistakes and failure are bad. You can use the pause button below to pause the video while you make this childhood scenario more real for yourself. When you're done imagining, press the play button. As you imagine this scene, giving it this other meaning, does it still feel as if your parents' behavior and their comments are making you feel that mistakes and failure are bad? Probably not. And if you didn't feel mistakes and failure are bad then, would you feel it now? Again, you've probably just answered no, out loud. So mom and dad's behavior never caused you to feel mistakes and failure are bad. That feeling came from your interpretation of their behavior. And since your feelings were not caused by events in reality, they were only the result of the meaning you made up to explain the events, is it real your feelings tell you nothing about mistakes and failure? Okay, now take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and then say out loud, mistakes and failure are bad. Is it the truth? Does it still feel like the truth? You might say, of course mistakes and failure are not bad. How could I possibly think that after going through all this? But I'm not asking if the belief makes logical sense. I'm asking you to look at the statement in the same way you did when you started working on this belief. Does it still seem like mistakes and failure are bad is true on a gut level? Does the statement feel true? Or do the words feel flat now? Don't forget that we form beliefs to give meaning to events that have no real meaning. Having done that, we then think we observe the meaning in the events, out there in the world. It becomes a fact for us. Once we realize that the earlier events never had any real meaning, that the meaning was only in our mind, that it was never a fact, and that the feeling we had was caused by the meaning we gave meaningless events, the belief disappears forever. Take another deep breath, then let it out, and say out loud, mistakes and failure are bad. Doesn't it feel very different when you say these words now than when you said them at the beginning? Is there any sense of believing the statement at all? Unless the belief is 100% gone, so the words have no emotional meaning for you, you probably still have the belief. Remember, holding a belief is like being pregnant. You either is or you ain't. There's no sort of. The way to know if a belief has been eliminated is not to look at your feelings or thoughts in the past when you did have the belief, or even try to guess how you'll feel in the future. The belief felt true on some level when you started, or you would not have spent time on this program. When you say the words of the belief now, mistakes and failure are bad, do they still feel true like they did when you started? Or do they sound sort of meaningless? If there's no emotional resonance when you say the words, the belief is gone. It might be difficult to accept that a belief you've lived with for many years can be eliminated in about 30 minutes. And yet that's exactly what's happened tens of thousands of times using the Lefko method. If mistakes and failure are bad feels true at all, even a little bit, then you probably still have the belief. You probably need to review the last part of the process a second time, because on some level it still seems like you saw your belief. Once it's clear that you never saw mistakes and failure are bad, the belief will be totally gone. So if this is the case, please click the repeat button to repeat that step of the process. I want to congratulate you. You just eliminated a belief you've been living with for most of your life. Do you know that some people, possibly even you, spend years trying to get rid of a belief, and you just did it in about 30 minutes? Your fear of making mistakes and your lack of self-confidence won't stop after eliminating only one belief. But by the time you've eliminated all 19 beliefs and the 4 conditionings in this program, or at least the ones you actually have, you'll be aware of a dramatic shift in your thoughts, feelings, and behavior, especially in your level of self-confidence. I promise. Getting rid of the next belief is crucial to improving your level of self-confidence and reducing your need for the acceptance and approval of others. If you believe I'm not good enough, which is the next belief, you may need the approval of others to make you feel that you are good enough. When this belief is gone, the little voice in your head that criticizes what you do will quiet down. You may find that getting rid of the critic in your mind and getting one belief closer to being able to openly disagree with others is definitely worth the few minutes it'll take. You now have a choice. Either click Next Belief and move on to the next belief, or make sure this program is bookmarked and close it. Then make a note to yourself when you plan to return and eliminate some more beliefs.